Welcome to the Neighborhood Church Revive podcast. We are so glad that you're joining us today as we unpack big ideas about God's Word together. My name is Sean Thomas. I'm the worship pastor here at Neighborhood Church, and we believe that God's Word is relevant and helpful even for today, which is why we take the time to unpack what we talked about on Sunday, just things going on in the world, and continuing our conversation in 2 Corinthians. We're back to our regular series. If you guys listened last week, we had a little missions focus, but that kind of carried over this week, at least over at the Neighborhood Church Los Alamitos campus. And speaking of the Los Alamitos campus, Pastor Jericho is joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, Jericho preached at the Los Al campus. It was, it's super fun, just really just in-depth for kind of like a dense theological passage, that has a kind of a lot of tradition wrapped up with it. So we're going to dive in the deep end today and probably talk about basketball, football. What sport? I know whenever Pastor John comes in, baseball, football, Pastor Justin, Seahawks, you guys listening probably know that. What's your sport?
Soccer for me, European English soccer.
Is Real Madrid? Is that your
Real
team?
Madrid's in Spain.
Yeah.
For me, it's Liverpool.
Oh!
Liverpool Football Club is who I follow.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you probably are going down to Ye Old Ship. Have you ever been there?
The Santa Ana one closed.
Oh, it did?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
But yeah, thanks for streaming services. There's a ton of options,
Yeah.
So if it's a Saturday morning game, I'm watching it. But if it's Sunday morning, I stay away from the internet until I watch the replay.
Yeah, so it doesn't get spoiled. And
yes.
Well, speaking of missions, I went to South Africa on a mission trip right after they did the World Cup down there. Vuvuzelas, those little horns.
2012, is that what we went?
It was
11?
2010, I believe it was. Yeah. So it was shortly, after... and it was just, those things were still, people were just like,
they're still going.
It was like, oh, okay, here we go. Well, enough soccer talk. That was our soccer podcast for the day. But Pastor Jericho gave the message over at Los Al. We were back into our 2 Corinthians passage with suffering, having hope in the midst of suffering or enduring hardship. And it's been interesting because this is, as we've been going through the letter, it's kind of, and you spoke a little bit to this on Sunday, Jericho. It's oftentimes when I am reading the Bible, and I think it's a normal thing, I have the tendency to really personalize it. Like what hardships am I going through, or what challenges, or where am I struggling? And it's been great going through this series to really look at it from Paul's point of view and his particular interaction with the Corinthian church, and how they were kind of having this contention with them of like, Paul, like is he doing things right? He seems to be getting so much resistance, and we have these other followers that maybe we're a little more enamored with, and Paul's, somewhat, just saying, hey guys, I'm all about teaching Christ, and that's who we want to focus on. But then also in our particular passage here, really a beautiful anticipation of the resurrection, and looking at our new bodies, and so much of what Paul talks about is, we're going to rejoice in the midst of suffering, and there's these things, yes, we will endure hardships, him in particular, but that identifies us with Christ, even more so having a glorified body someday, as Christ set that example for us. Right. And it's interesting because I feel like, at least, and maybe this is changing recently, but I feel like for the last 10, 15 years, at least in the Christian circles that I've run in, that's not really a topic of conversation. Heaven or the afterlife or what we'll do in heaven. And it's not a knock, but it's like, okay, we're navigating crazy things in life in this, in our time and everything like that. And it almost seems like when I look at church history, sometimes it seems like there's more of a focus on the afterlife and the glorified body and like what we have to anticipate. So just curious, as you were researching and preparing for your message, like
that's definitely the backdrop. I think I love the scriptures that it speaks to, if it's lacking in our culture, that, hey, we need to be thinking about it. Or if we're too obsessed about it as a church, the scriptures are actually like a great no, this is the right way to think about it.
Yeah.
We have a Spanish pastor, Pastor Manuel, who just came back from an EFC,
Or church association.
Yeah. And actually their topic was the theology of anthropology. And I'm so interested in this. And I said, and I think I'll get to my point.
Yeah,
but
take your time.
Before, people would always ask, who is God? Who am I? And what's my purpose? Right? We're asking those 3 questions.
Yeah, big questions.
I don't think people care about is there a God anymore. I don't think people are asking what our purpose is. I think right now culture is asking, what is a person?
Wow.
And so as we look at our personhood, and I think Paul's brilliant at this, it's if we look at the end, if we look at heaven, if we look at our resurrected bodies, that actually speaks into how we live today. But because our culture is so much about what is a person, right? What's your gender, right?
The transgender discussion is quite
all of that.
Big.
Of what makes a person,
Yeah.
right? And how do we show that we are intrinsically valuable? I think part of our discussion that's lacking is actually the afterlife. Is if you're a person that has a soul, that has a spiritual aspect, where does that spiritual aspect of your personhood go at the end?
Yeah.
And so if we don't care about that discussion later on, we're missing out on the complexity of who we are.
Yeah.
Right? So that's where I think I'm fascinated with the discussion of, hey, the scriptures say that there's a place for us, and is that heaven? Is that hell? That determines how we act and behave now and our purpose. Then I think if we can answer what is man, or what is a man, human being, then we can answer is there a God? Is there a purpose?
Coming out of that.
But I think that's the question of our culture right now.
That's really interesting, and I liked. It's kind of funny. I encourage our listeners definitely go back and watch Sunday's sermons. Pastor John unfortunately can't be here today, but he preached at Cyprus, and it's interesting. I always love seeing the different nuances that you guys take in your messages. But I like Jericho. There were some Greek words that you were throwing at us, and there's kind of an idea of like a double self type of a thing.
Oh, yeah.
And that was just really fascinating. And I liked how you kind of, going back to what you were saying a moment ago, like that there's implications in the sense of like, we'll have our resurrected bodies, where, and that's, we can have the discussion now, but we can also have it for hours and hours and hours of like, okay, what does DNA restoration look like? Or will I have similar ailments that I have now in the future? There's that discussion, but also how we steward our bodies now. There's kind of like an echo that we anticipate, but has implications for us today. And I liked how, let
me spell it out. Paul, I think the context of 2 Corinthians is the church is wealthy. The church is in a metropolis. It's a beautiful area. Yeah. And they have this pastor who is a construction guy. And he's always like, he's got an ailment, something in 2 Corinthians that will lead to later on where the thorn in his flesh, and so we don't know what that is. Maybe he's got a disability, but they don't like him. They're like, there's some beautiful other pastors that, look amazing, are very eloquent. Why do we have a pastor that kind of sucks? Is essentially what's happening. And Paul is saying, hey, like, I'm proud of you guys. Like, you're my kids, but please don't reject me. And in his defense of their pastor or their apostle, he's saying, our bodies are essentially like a temporary tent, but the Lord is making a heavenly body for us, a heavenly resurrected body that God is putting together. And then his second illustration is that we're looking to be clothed. We groan, we long to be clothed. And the Greek word there it's like a double covering. Like we're already covered in our temporal body, but we long to be recovered. Like I don't know if that's like a thing, but like, we long to be clothed with our resurrected body. Yeah. And so what it means is we actually have to be good stewards of our bodies now. Yeah. And then I always bring it back to Jesus. You know, if you're stuck and you're like, I don't know if there's an afterlife, I don't know if there's this, I always point people to Jesus, right?
Yeah.
Like, hey, Jesus came back to life. And the claims that he said, him coming back to life both proves all the things that he said about himself and the healings, but also like he's saying, hey, you're going to have a resurrected body one day. And so here's the discussion that I don't know if it's ever going to be resolved. Like, Jesus had scars in his hands.
Yeah.
And he said to Thomas, look at my side, my tummy, look at my hands. And so I wonder if our resurrected bodies will have scars, which some philosophers say maybe we will have like, we still have memories, right? We'll still have memories of maybe the pain, but we're not experiencing pain anymore.
Yeah.
So I wonder if our resurrected bodies will show, I don't know, like my breakup from when I was a teenager. You know what I mean? All these things. So what do we carry in our resurrected bodies as scars?
Yeah.
Or do we just have memories? Right? And so I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting. I mean, gosh, yeah, that's really interesting because, I mean, we can assume that our resurrected bodies will function, like flesh will probably function similar. I mean, people also, you know, are we going to defecate? You know, I mean, like to kind of go to one extreme.
Yes.
You know, and so we could kind of assume there'll be like similarities, and if we have like neural pathways, you know, as a resurrected being, they say that memories and emotions get embedded into our physiology, right? You know, there's some people who will do like massages and things like that. That kind of unlock emotions and things like that. So I wonder if there is that sense of, you know, like, and I always love in Revelation, you know, it talks about God wiping away every tear, you know, so does that suggest that there will be a sense of what was before, memories, but in this state that we're in now, that we wrestle with that for our lives, right? I mean, yes, the Spirit dwells within us and helps us through that. When we are in the Lord's presence, you know, in the afterlife, you know, and He's wiping away the tear, He's big enough to hold that and to is that erased? Is that alleviated? You know, and that's an interesting question.
There's a book, I don't know if it's a Christian book, called "The Body Keeps the Score," right? And I think
I've heard of it. Yeah,
you know that we carry in our bodies trauma, and so it again shows back. It goes back to the whole discussion of what is a human being, and so our mind, body, soul connection. Yeah, right. And so if we have undealt with, unprocessed things, that our bodies, our physical bodies, carry them. Yeah. But just going back to the whole stewardship of like, we have to. We are covered now in our temporary bodies, but we long to be covered with our resurrected bodies. But we still have to be good stewards of our bodies now. And you know, you're also a coach, right? Like you work in a gym,
fitness, and everything.
And so if your view of the afterlife, or if your view of the end is like it's gonna burn anyway, so like why are you paying me?
Why not?
But if it's true that we're gonna have to answer to what we did to our bodies, or what we did in our bodies. Yeah, take care of your body now. You know, don't you want to be strong enough to like pick up your kid, or like to run with your grandkids? Yeah. So there's benefits now, but I think it's like, no, God didn't just give us this temporary episode so that we can have eternity. Like, I think we have to take care of our bodies. We have to take care of the earth. We have to take care of different things still. You know,
and that's a good call about it's all going to burn, you know, because there is, I mean, there's even, you know, I mean, you know, when you're younger, you know, and like, you know, death or your mortality isn't really on your radar, and you're like, I'm going to eat whatever I want to eat. And, you know, we can kind of process, I'm going to do whatever I want to do. You know, we have to keep that mind of responsibility, you know, and implication, you know, of what are we doing? Not, I mean, obviously, like what we're eating, you know, our physical activity or whatever, but just being good stewards of, whether it's the flesh or just or abiding by God's directives, that, hey, I have the best way to live for you is this, there's self-destructive things that you can do, you mentioned, like breakups, and everything like that. Excuse me. I mean, there's a lot of things that have implications that could hurt us, if it is emotional, and just weigh on us. And so how are we living our lives? Jericho, it's interesting as you were talking, you being our pastor of outreach, community connection, it seems like from an outside observation, a lot of what you have done involves stewardship of the body in some way, whether it's pickleball is huge. You're in the midst of the basketball season with the kids, but also there was a hiking club that I think kind of you initiated that's kind of taken on its own life. There's gaming clubs like board game that have kind of taken on their own lives or just people are doing stuff like that. And it's interesting how a lot of what your role is has an experiential, to your point of what are we doing here and now, that's just interesting to me that you're kind of talking about this, that your message was very much, what, our future resurrected bodies has implications for what we're doing now. And it seems like a lot of the role that you play is getting people interacting together, but not just in a static room of like, hey, we're going to all be quiet in a circle and do nothing, right. But it's like, hey, we're going to do things and connect. And out of that, it's kind of cool.
No, that's really cool. Yeah, I didn't think of it that way.
Yeah.
I think maybe the Christianity that I grew up with was a little too serious. Like, it's only a group if we're like studying the Bible, which is great. I love studying the Bible.
Yeah, yeah.
But the hiking group, I'm like, no, we just like hiking, and we just happen to also go to church. Yeah, and I don't think we're watering down the gospel. It's as much as like I think it's relational. Like before anybody cares about what we have to say about the gospel, like they have to be our friends first. So I think it's a step of. I think we need to restore what it looks like to start having friendships and building trust before we can speak into it. I mean, they could ask us, but we could tell them podcast or through whatever or broadcasting in the sidewalk. But like, I think the most effective thing is, hey, if we have a relational connection, then maybe I can risk telling you about the gospel. Because I love you enough. Or we just love pickleball. We just love basketball. Come play with us. And so we're just like you, And
this is we like games, we like things. Well, and I love how in the for maybe some of you listening, you have kids who play, and so you guys know you do little devotionals. Like the coaches are encouraged with their players to kind of like, hey, we're learning the fundamentals of the game. There's discipline involved in that. There's strategy, but also, hey, in life, there's discipline involved, and there's other sorts of strategies to live life, and that's so cool.
We run a kindergarten to third grade basketball league right now. It's a winter basketball league, and we partner with Upward, and so they provide everything for us. And so for during practice, we're teaching them, how to play the game. But then during halftime, there's a devotional, and normally like. If we were more community friendly, we'd talk about like the characteristics of God, that he's kind, we have to be kind, but we're actually talking about the miracles of Jesus. So we don't hold back. We've just been talking about miracles, and then during game day, I come up for a halftime devo for all the parents, grandparents, and everybody in the room. Last week we talked about how Jesus has authority to heal, and he doesn't have to touch a body. So the implication is we can pray for our friends, whether it's a cold, whether it's cancer, whether it's
the spectrum
a grandma, whatever it is. And just because we pray doesn't mean Jesus will heal. Like he's still a person. But we get to pray. And so this week we're talking about how every single person is valuable. From the story of Jesus healing Jairus' daughter and the lady who's been bleeding for 12 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That interruptions can happen. But, everyone's valuable to Jesus. And so, we love it.
Dude, it's so good.
Come check us out, and we're hoping to do more, maybe indoor soccer, maybe a pickleball, something.
Yeah, I know you guys did a tournament last year, and there's maybe talk of a tournament again.
We have a tournament the Saturday after Easter, so April 26th. We are trying to raise $11,000 to send kids to Hume.
Yeah.
If we can cover that, that'd be great. And so if you have any pickleball listeners, look at our website soon. Information should be out. And yeah, it's 2-on-2.
Yeah,
we don't take ourselves too seriously.
You got some good players. I drive in and people are flying all over. That's in the parking lot. We set it up and we have good cones, so no one's like driving through your courts or anything like that.
Yeah, we play Sunday afternoons and Wednesday mornings, and we love the game. We love our SoCal weather. Although it's been raining, so we've been canceling a lot of those lately.
Yeah, we're kind of in the thick of that. February, March, April is kind of when we hit. California. It's like, ooh,
Who are we to complain, right? There's like storms and.
Dude, I met a guy. Speaking of the gym that I coach at, I met a guy who was just visiting, and he is from Minnesota. And I was asking what his fitness background was, and he was like, "Oh, I do cycling in Minnesota, like through the snow, like the gnarly bicycles that go like through
fat
gravel."
tires.
Yeah, fat tires is the. He was talking about. Yeah, we got these brands that we do, and it's like, man, that's next level. He's like. Yeah, it's like it was 10 degree or negative 10. He checked on his phone, and now he's in California, and I'm freezing. It's like 62. I'm like, oh my goodness, where are my galoshes?
Right. Oh my goodness.
I'll put a link to what galoshes are.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you want to tell us about that quickly?
yeah. That's all these German phrases, galoshes that I learned growing up that I don't need to use. Yeah, you going back to your message, Jericho. I love how you said a moment ago you like to point back to Jesus, and in your message you were talking about, and I'm trying to remember the passage that Jesus was quoting from Psalms, I believe it was, and it was just a really cool. And I love in Scripture when it's like we can look at the epistles, like the disciples kind of writing about their current experiences in the church that points back to Jesus, what he said directly impacting the church, but Jesus is looking back at the Old Testament, and this is so interesting.
It's actually, so yes, we long to be clothed, and I was just talking about how, it goes back to working out. This is why we're talking about this. The Greek and the Roman people at this time loved working out in the nude.
Yeah, that was right.
And so they loved working out in the nude. And for the Jewish kind of Christian, Judeo-Christian folk at the time, they associate nakedness to the sin of Adam, right? Adam realized that he was naked in the garden after...
And that caused shame and disconnection from God. So it's like, oh gosh, this is a cultural disconnect big time.
So Paul was both speaking to the, hey, your neighbors love working out in the nude and you guys think it's shameful. And so we long to be clothed. But then I love pointing back to Jesus, that they actually gambled for his clothes at the cross. And so it was a fulfillment from, and so that's John 19:23-24. The soldiers cast lots for Jesus' garment. And so pointing back to, yes, as humans, we long to be clothed, but Christ bore our shame and actually was stripped naked at the cross. Again, to see the Philippians too, he gave up glory from heaven, became a man. He didn't just die a regular death. He kind of died a criminal, shameful death. Yeah. And he was stripped naked, left to his undergarments. Yeah. And so Paul is beautifully just weaving this. Yeah, we seek to be clothed. Look at your neighbors who are naked. But also Jesus, disrobed himself of glory. Even the clothes that he had on his back after his itinerant 3 years was taken from him. Yeah. And they mocked him. They put a purple cloth and said, "Hey, who's hitting you?" Or King of the Jews. Yeah. And so we look to Christ all the time. And the more and more I think you walk with him, you realize, man, Jesus, we need you. We need you all the more. And dude, I love the worship selections, by the way, this past Sunday.
Oh, good.
The blessed assurance, victory in Jesus. Even just Cornerstone, it just spoke so much into the passage. And so thank you for that. The ministry you have.
Dude. Yeah, man. Yeah, it's wonderful. For those listening, oftentimes whomever is preaching, I will, study the passage alongside, but also connect, and Jericho, this Sunday I was like, hey, what about this? What about this? I'll do that with John too, or he'll do that with Bob here at Cypress. And yeah, it's wonderful to reiterate and emphasize. And also it's neat when, different things are kind of popping out, and it's like, the random, like open the eyes of my heart. We've been doing that kind of regularly over at the Los Al campus, just, to kind of, it's nice to have a rotation of like, oh, I know we're not learning new songs every day. So it's like, I know this song. And it was neat because, excuse me, you had picked up on that and were like, oh, this is quite appropriate. I was like, oh yeah, that is, this identification with, the Lord and living, a life, focused on him. And gosh, I that's so powerful, going back to what you were saying about Jesus, that Paul was using that example for a church body that you're saying, is maybe more affluent, maybe more kind of like, hey, look at, which was a struggle, maybe for the Jews of that period, kind of one of those Pharisaical things of like, hey, now we're Christians, we're doing our thing, but we're still, hey, look at the shame on our neighbors, look at our prestige, look at how we're performing, even with the Corinthians of like, in 1 Corinthians of like, hey, look at us, like welcoming in, like tolerating, these sin issues that are going on with our own church, and Paul's kind of trying to set them straight, but using that example of like, hey, it's not about the outward appearance, it's, look at Jesus, like literally taking on shame, being hung on a cross, which is, gosh, that's talked about being cursed, in the Old Testament, and it's like, oh man, yeah, let's keep in mind who Jesus is and what he did for us, and try and live lives like that.
Right.
Yeah, man.
So yeah, no, it's great. I'm stuck at the open the eyes of my heart. I'm like, how does it relate? And it just goes back to the, hey, we live by faith and not by sight, and so at the end of chapter 4, where he says, although we're outwardly wasting away, inwardly we're being renewed. And so we fix our eyes on what is unseen, the eternal things, not the temporary things. And so the application in our chapter 5 is actually, we walk by faith and not by sight. And so I think the world needs more Christians to, hey, what is it? What is my working out? How does my working out actually feed my Christian walk? And yeah, I care about my body. It's for now, for this life, but also, hey, there's something to learn.
Yeah.
I love working out, object lessons, but I rarely work out. But I think it's good. It's like you're putting your body through stress.
Yeah.
So that you can grow muscles.
Yeah.
And
we're made, not to geek out on physiology, but it's things like endorphins. There's different. Oh gosh, now I'm totally blanking on dopamine, endorphins.
Yeah.
Serotonin.
I'm really good at eating chips and soda, and I can get those too. But the more appropriate working out to get it.
What is the perfect 3? Chips, soda, pizza,
the alcohol or something.
Okay,
yeah, something.
Yeah, that's it. No, but as we're like, our bodies are made to pump. I just think it's amazing, as they pump, as they do a thing, as we run, a sustained duration, it's like there's physiological things that happen that are a blessing, I think. If you look at it from an evolutionist point of view, it's sustaining, it's driving, sure. Sure. And I think God uses those things. I think he created those things, right? But it pushes us forward. And I think that goes back to even what you were saying about, having basketball devotions or ministries, and being in a community. And for those of us listening, something you might want to ponder is are you going to work, going to the office, taking your kids to school, going to school activities? What are the community? What are the things? If you're playing pickleball somewhere else in another city, how are you engaging with that community? And how does that grease the wheels?
Yeah.
Kind of to your point, Jericho, of community, of now I have a place that I can talk to someone. And we often find it. We as believers know that the Holy Spirit dwells within us, and we know that that is attractive, especially to people who might be seeking, right? And so more often than not, I'm sure we all have stories of people coming to us after a time of like, oh, we're playing pickleball together, or our kids are in this play together, or whatever it is. After a time, people are drawn to us, and those are the opportunities that we have to like talk about our faith, or what are the miracles that God has done in my life? And we look at Jesus doing all these miracles, and what are the conversations that we can have out of that?
Oh my goodness, I love it. I keep thinking of, I didn't ask his permission, Andy. Andy's my buddy. He's British Andy.
Andy.
British Andy is in the catering business. And so we met him at the Mayor's Prayer Breakfast.
Oh, yeah.
And I just was running my mouth talking about pickleball. And so he's like, hey, mate, I haven't played pickleball in a while. And I said, come play with us. And so now we have a friendship with Andy.
Yeah.
We're buddies. We go paddleboarding sometimes.
Nice.
And so we've been playing pickleball, and he and Ted's an usher at our church and just loves sports. He's a good buddy. And he and Ted have really connected.
Nice.
And so I was like, hey, Ted, I need you to coach a kindergarten team, and I need to give you an assistant. What do you think about Andy? And so Andy, who was, a local in our city, has formed a friendship through pickleball, and now is coaching with Ted. Yeah. And it's fun watching those two goofballs. Like Ted's always like, I have to explain to the kids his accent, because he's got a British accent.
Kindergartners would be confused, like, what is going on?
But it's, over basketball. And I love that there's a friendship, and, they're sharing the gospel to these kids, and they're teaching them how to shoot the ball. They're loving the parents, and they're showing up, and we're having a great time. Like those guys, and so we love basketball. Yeah, we love pickleball, but we love Jesus. That's why we do all these things. And, it's fun. It's fun to like get to know Andy, and I hope that he benefits from our friendship. But like, I'm always like, dude, do you have a background in that? Can you fix my car? So, he's looked at my car. You know what I mean? And
all these other blessings.
Oh, great. And just this is us. This is what we do, and we just like to have fun, and we're awkward and weird.
Neighborhood church. We're awkward and weird. That'll be our new. We're working on a new campaign for our street signs. Well, maybe not that, but well, and I love that just goes. It's kind of funny. Like if you look at Jesus, in his ministry, and he's coming to these blue collar people. The gospel's for everyone, from the lowest to the highest, from leaders and whatnot, but it is about living your life. How are you going about your life and living in the midst of the gospel, and it's not, there's, speaking of church history or church traditions, there's some people who would withdraw from society, and they were working stuff out, and they had epiphanies and everything like that. But it just seems like so often, like the Christian life is meant to be expressed like as you're going, like and as you're doing your things, being responsible. I'm raising a family. I'm going to work. I'm doing X, Y, and Z, and it's like it's not like a contrast or a difference. Right. It's like a thing.
It's not a mode, right? You don't put on your Christian hat and say, "All right, this is me now." It's like, no, it's you. You're just you.
Yeah.
And the Holy Spirit's working through my flaws. Yeah. That working despite my insecurities. And, but it's fun. This is it. Dude. And so, walk by faith, not by sight.
Dude, I like that. Well, Jericho, thank you so much for joining us and just rapping and doing our podcast. Thank you for everybody listening. Jericho, those were great closing words, but anything before we wrap up that you want to close with?
I just want to encourage people, to listen to the 2 Corinthians series. I know I said this in my sermon, that it's actually, for my phase of life and my phase of ministry, it's been really comforting. and I don't know if it's, I grew up in a shame culture where we don't talk about the hard things, but 2 Corinthians just says, hey, if you're suffering, here's how to have hope. Yeah. And so if that's you in your season, if you're having a great season, you don't need to talk about bummer stuff. Great. But if you're struggling, listen into the 2 Corinthians series. It's been helpful for me as I navigate the things that I'm like, oh, I need to grieve on this little aspect. Or, hey, I need to actually have a different way to think. It's been beneficial for me, and I hope it could be a ministry to somebody. So,
that's a great call. And speaking of that, as I transition to my outro, I want to plug our YouTube pages, Neighborhood Church of Los Alamitos and Neighborhood Church of Cypress. And I think that's a great call, to point people. We, you can see all our past live streams, although last week it wasn't a live stream, but you can go to our videos tab on our YouTube page and just see all of the series from whether it's Corinthians or we were in Acts before that. Obviously we had Christmas recently too. So excuse me, I definitely encourage everyone to go through our social media and our YouTube page to kind of check that out. Also, a lot of the resources that we talked about. We had a book that we talked about. I'll get some of the quotes from our from the study guide and just the Bible passages that we talked about. Those will be on neighborhoodchurch.com/revive. And then this week's episode will be on our homepage, neighborhoodchurch.com. You can find that. You can also find us on Instagram and Facebook under those same handles that we talked about. And definitely check us out. You can email us with any questions or comments that you have at connect@neighborhoodchurch.com. That's CONNECT @neighborhoodchurch.com. Until next time, we pray that God would revive your soul.